"I couldn't hold it any longer," she whispered. But the rancher's next move shocked everyone. Emma's secret finally spills during a storm on Dusty Creek Ranch, leaving everyone stunned. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Where are you watching from? Let's get started. Dusty Creek Ranch sprawled across 8,000 acres of open Wyoming land, a place so wide and quiet it could make a city-born soul feel like they had stepped off the edge of the world. The sky seemed bigger there, the horizon stretched farther, and the silence had a weight to it, steady, grounding, almost ancient. For Emma Walker, who had lived nearly her whole life boxed in by skyscrapers, train stations, coffee shop chatter, and the constant hurry of Chicago streets, the first days on the ranch had felt like culture shock she couldn't name. The stillness was beautiful, but also overwhelming. She had come to Dusty Creek searching for something she couldn't define, a reset, a place to breathe, somewhere far enough from her old life that the past couldn't chase her. She told the Hartley family she wanted ranch work experience, but the truth was simpler. She wanted quiet, because her grief had been loud for too long. Her brother's death had cracked her world open, and the months after the funeral had blurred together until she barely recognized the woman in her own mirror. Wyoming was supposed to help her remember who she used to be. Ranch life didn't slow down for heartbreak, though, and Emma learned that quickly. Work began before sunrise, no matter how heavy her eyes or her thoughts. She mucked stalls, learned to throw hay bales, practiced saddling her assigned mare, and forced her body into rhythms she had never needed before. The dust got under her nails, sweat soaked her shirts by noon, and she developed blisters that gloves couldn't hide. But each small skill she learned, catching a lead rope cleanly, guiding her horse through a turn, gave her the faintest flicker of accomplishment. Still, there were moments she wondered whether she belonged there. The ranch hands moved like they were born into the soil itself, each step confident and sure. They spoke little but understood each other through glances and gestures. They were not unkind, just efficient, disciplined, practical. Cole Hartley, the ranch's owner, was the quietest of them all, broad-shouldered, sun-browned, steady as a mountain ridge. He had a way of showing up right when things were about to go wrong, correcting a mistake without shaming it. Emma couldn't read him, but she respected him. The storm rolled in on a day that had started like any other. Cloudless sky, dry wind, horses restless from the heat. Emma had been assigned to help move the cattle from one grazing pasture to another, routine work if you knew what you were doing. She didn't, not really, not yet. When the sky darkened, Cole gave a single short whistle and the hands moved faster, closing ranks around the herd. Lightning split the horizon, wind shoved through the grasslands, and the cattle grew jittery from the pressure in the air. Somewhere in the scramble, a calf bolted through a gap, and Emma reacted before she thought. She chased on foot, boots sliding in the red dirt as she pushed through the fence line and down toward a shallow gully where water pooled after storms. She could still hear the herd behind her, but the thunder drowned out everything else. She caught up to the calf at the edge of a wind-battered meadow, breath ragged, rain hitting her face like grit. She managed to corner the animal and calm it down, but when she finally looked back the way she had come, she couldn't see the ranch, the riders, or even the trail. Everything was just gray-sheeted rain and unfamiliar land. Her chest tightened. She had never been lost in the wilderness before. Getting turned around in the city was simple. You could ask someone or look up a map or watch for a train line. But Dusty Creek's back acres stretched into what felt like endless nothing. She tried to walk the calf back uphill, but the ground grew slick under her boots and fatigue hit her harder than fear. She hadn't eaten since daybreak, hadn't rested since dawn, hadn't noticed how thin she'd worn herself trying to be fine. Her pulse pounded in her ears louder than the thunder, and her eyes stung. Cole found her near the old windmill tower, his horse trotting slow through the storm-silvered grass. He didn't shout her name or scold her for breaking formation. He just swung down from the saddle and walked toward her with the steady, unhurried pace of a man assessing the damage before reacting. Emma had mud streaked up her jeans, rain plastering her hair to her face, and the calf pressed anxiously against her leg like it had chosen her for safety. Something about being seen like that, not groomed, not guarded, not okay, knocked the last of her composure loose. She tried to explain herself, but the words tangled in her throat. She wasn't just wet or lost. She was worn down in the bone-deep way grief erodes someone, quietly, invisibly, until it all spills over. When Cole stopped in front of her, tipping his hat back so she could see his eyes, she felt something inside her break open. I couldn't hold it any longer, she whispered. Her voice was small, and not just from exhaustion. She meant the storm inside her more than the storm above them, the weight she had tried to outrun all the way to Wyoming. Cole didn't move for a long moment. Not because he didn't understand, but because he did. That stillness of his was not coldness. It was consideration. He looked at her the way you look at a skittish horse, steadily without pressure. There was no surprise on his face, only recognition, as if he'd seen this before in other people worn thin by what life took from them. Then he breathed out once, slow and grounded, as though the right response was not comfort or correction, but simply presence. Instead of telling her to pull herself together or pushing her to keep walking, he reached out, not to drag but to offer. A hand, a pause, a silent permission to stop pretending she was fine. And in that instant, the storm behind her ribs finally had somewhere safe to land. Cole didn't lecture her or rush her. He simply stood there with the patience of someone who understood storms, both the kind that rolled across the plains and the kind that settled inside a person's chest. The calf nudged Emma's knee nervously, and Cole took its lead rope gently, giving her room to breathe while still grounding the situation. She wiped at her face, though there was no point. Rain disguised tears easily. But the defeat in her posture, the unguarded exhaustion, spoke more honestly than anything she could have said. For the first time all summer, she wasn't pretending to be fine. Cole led his horse beside them, motioning for Emma to walk with him. The storm hadn't broken yet, but they were no longer racing against panic. She followed in silence, her boots squelching through the wet grass, the wind tugging her soaked clothes. Every step felt heavier than the last, not from the terrain, but from the emotional unraveling she could no longer hold back. She had guarded her grief like something fragile, convinced nobody could understand the shape of it. Yet here was someone who said nothing, and made her feel less alone anyway. When they reached higher ground, the ranch came back into view through the curtain of rain. Corrals, the long barn roof, the weathered porch light left on like a lighthouse. Cole secured the calf in the holding pen before walking her toward the house. The other ranch hands were still riding the herd in, shouting directions through the storm, but Cole didn't rejoin them. He made a decision without announcing it. Her state mattered more than the routine. For Emma, that kind of steady prioritization was unfamiliar kindness, quiet, but unmistakably deliberate. Inside the mudroom, the sound of the rain dulled to a distant roar on the tin roof. Cole didn't pepper her with questions or ask for explanations. He just handed her a towel and gestured toward the old wood stove burning in the side room. The heat thawed the numbness from her fingers, and something behind her ribs softened with it. She realized she had braced for disappointment or criticism or cold neutrality, everything she had grown used to receiving whenever her grief surfaced. Instead, he offered dignity, the rarest form of compassion. When he returned, he carried 2 steaming mugs of coffee and a steady quiet that didn't demand anything from her. He sat across from her, elbows resting loosely on his knees, posture relaxed, gaze present without intruding. "Ranch work's honest," he said after a long moment. "But it doesn't cure anything by force. Hurt doesn't disappear just because you outrun the city." His voice wasn't soft so much as anchored, calm, matter-of-fact, unpretending. Emma blinked hard because she hadn't told him about Chicago or her brother or why she'd run. Some losses are visible without being spoken. She tried to thank him, but words faltered again. Instead, she wrapped her hands around the coffee mug like it was the only steady thing she could hold on to. The heat grounded her. So did the silence. Cole didn't push her to confess or unpack anything. He simply waited, attentive, unhurried, as if he believed she had time to come apart and time to come back to herself again. The simplicity of that grace unraveled another knot inside her. Not everyone who listens needs a confession. Sometimes they just need presence. After several long minutes, he finally spoke again, quieter now. Loss doesn't make you weak. Carrying it alone does. Emma wasn't used to being given permission to stop performing strength. In Chicago, people hurried past grief like it was a traffic obstruction. Something to dodge, not face. On the ranch, where life and death were constant neighbors, honesty wasn't dramatic. It was survival. And in Cole's expression, she didn't see pity, only recognition. A man who had buried his own share of history without advertising it. The storm outside began to lighten. Thunder trailing off in the distance while the scent of wet sage drifted in through the cracked window. Emma hadn't noticed she was shivering until he reached over to adjust the stove draft and wordlessly draped a blanket across her shoulders. Small gesture. Immense effect. It wasn't comfort handed down from above, but steadiness offered side by side. For the first time since she arrived, the ranch didn't feel like a place she was borrowing. It felt like a place she might eventually belong. When she finally looked up at him, something in her chest loosened. Not healed. Healing doesn't happen in a single afternoon, but loosened, enough to breathe. Cole held her gaze with the quiet certainty of someone who wasn't afraid of brokenness. "You don't have to outrun anything here," he said. "Just learn how to stand still again." The words struck her deeper than she expected. She had come west looking for silence and distance. What she found instead was space, and the difference between the two felt monumental. The storm passed by nightfall, leaving the sky washed clean and the land breathing steam from its surface. But what stayed with Emma wasn't the rain or the fear or the moment she broke. It was the way he stayed. Not fixing, not saving, just staying. Later, when she lay in the bunkhouse listening to the storm water drip from the roof, she understood the shock of the day wasn't that she'd come undone. It was that Cole hadn't stepped away from the unraveling. He had met it with steadiness. And in that quiet, unremarkable kind of grace, something new began.